is their work in January as the wildfires burned here in Southern California. Inmate firefighters pulling their weight to protect homes and lives, all while earning between $5 and $10 a day, some even less. Assemblymember Isaac Bryan says that's not fair, and those firefighters deserve a raise. He held a hearing about it today in Sacramento, and he joins us live now from Sacramento. Assemblymember, thanks for being with us.
Alex, it's always good to be with you.
So what is the push? What would you like to see happen now?
I'd like to see us pay all of our first responders. There were some heroic efforts this January. There's been a century of heroic firefighting efforts by incarcerated people in California. We show them gratitude, we send them thoughts and prayers, but we should do what's right and pay them a just wage.
As a state,
so what does that wage look like?
I think we should return this.
I think it should be the lowest wage anyone who's non-incarcerated gets paid when they're actively fighting a wildfire. But I'm open.
I actually had a structure fire, and one of the structure fires I was in.
We just want to make sure that we don't forget this moment and that we don't forget the first responders who helped save our region.
I mean, I guess the argument against that would be they're incarcerated, and we're sort of doing them a favor by letting them do this. It shouldn't necessarily be a big way to make money. What do you say to that?
Well, I think they owe restitution. I think all work is dignified and worthy of being treated as such. And I think that idea that incarcerated labor should be free goes back to the relics of slavery. We can do better. That's why we pay them something to begin with. But what we pay them is unjust. It's immoral. They did life-saving work, heroic work, brave work, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. And I think we should pay that debt.
Californians had an opportunity to push back on this concept of slavery for incarcerated work last year with a ballot proposition which failed. What do you think the voters were saying with that?
I think the voters were wrong, respectfully, and the voters of Nevada passed that same exact measure. And I think this vote today is an example of California's values. That's why in the Public Safety Committee, we had bipartisan support, including from 2 law enforcement officials who sit on that committee. This is about dignity, respect, and fair wages. We're going to fight for it, and I'm hopeful we're going to secure this.
So in terms of, you're pretty good at counting votes. That's literally part of your previous job. Do you have the votes to pass this thing in the Assembly, in the Senate? Any word from Governor Newsom?
We've got the votes to get this to the governor's desk. I have no doubt about it. This is a budget negotiation and a conversation. But we owe, as I've mentioned, a debt of gratitude to all of our frontline responders, and that includes the incarcerated people who were on those wildfire lines, who protected our homes, property, neighbors, and families. We can't just give them our thanks. We've got to pay them justly for that labor.
And in a year when we have budget challenges, in a year, this is some video of Hassan Piker out with some of those incarcerated firefighters, in a year when we're going to have to pay all this money to help people rebuild, do we have the money to do this?
Absolutely, and especially if the federal government steps up with the disaster aid that they owe us. California taxpayers pay over $80 billion a year more to the federal government than we receive back. Our request for disaster aid is only $40 billion. The federal government needs to step up. We have subsidized the rest of this country in good times, in bad times, and in disaster times. LA is asking for that relief, and the Trump administration should honor that ask.
We know Governor Newsom recently sat with the president at the White House for an hour and a half with him, and just tonight is sitting down with Steve Bannon for his new podcast. Any thoughts on that?
I personally wouldn't sit with Steve Bannon or Charlie Kirk or some of these other folks, but I think the governor is entitled to build relationships wherever he thinks it is helpful and in the interest of Californians. The relationship that I'm interested in right now is California's relationship to this country. We are a tax base that has subsidized this entire country in good times and bad times. As I've mentioned, there are disasters raging in South Carolina and in other places, and we are there for our neighbors. It's time for our country to be there for us, to be there for Los Angeles. We need this disaster aid, and we need it without strings attached.
Governor Newsom might argue that some of these conversations might help get that disaster aid in terms of building those relationships, but who knows? That's a more controversial story. The incarcerated firefighter, probably not as much so. Isaac Bryan, Assembly member, thanks so much for sharing your views. We appreciate it.